President Trump says only a few points of disagreement remain on a possible deal to end the war between Russia and Ukraine, with a U.S. official telling CBS News yesterday that Ukraine's government had agreed to a peace proposal in principle. Mr. Trump discussed the negotiations last night on Air Force One.
We're having some talks with Russia. Ukraine is doing well. I think they're pretty happy about it. They'd like to see it end. And we won't know for a little while, but we're making progress.
Meanwhile, the president is sending U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll to meet with Ukrainian officials, while Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to hold talks with Russian officials in Moscow next week. But Witkoff is now facing new questions after Bloomberg obtained what it said was an audio recording of the president's special envoy coaching a top Putin aide on how to win over Mr. Trump. Nancy Cordes asked the president about this report on Air Force One.
I haven't heard it, but I heard it was standard negotiation.
So you're not worried that he's too pro-Russian?
No, I think, look, this war could go on for years, and Russia's got a lot more people, got a lot more soldiers, you know. So I think if Ukraine can make a deal, it's a good thing. I think it's great for both.
We have just the person to discuss this with us now. Halyna Yanchenko is a Ukrainian Parliament member joining us from Berlin. Halyna, good morning to you and welcome. We're hearing there optimism from President Trump himself over the state of these peace talks, but I'm curious if you share that optimism and if it's shared by other members of Ukraine's parliament.
Well, as far as it will not be a Russian plan, that might be something to discuss with. As of the moment, I believe there are already enough of the evidence that so-called 28 points plan were drafted in Russia, in Russian language, then translated in English and basically communicated to Ukraine and Ukrainians through US. This is absolutely not acceptable. There is one thing that you should keep in mind about Ukraine. Ukraine is democratic country. So you can't force politicians to sign any document if it is not accepted by Ukrainian society. Otherwise, there will be revolutions. Otherwise, there will be a huge, actually, consequences for all negotiators who are taking place. This is my first point. Second point, it is absolutely not acceptable to include any topics or any discussions about trading land. First of all, because we are not talking about, empty places or abandoned land, we are talking about cities and villages where Ukrainians live. And we've already seen after Bucha what Russian occupants are doing to Ukrainians after occupation. They torture people, they murder Ukrainians, they kidnap Ukrainian children from their parents and send them out of Russia. Is this something that we want to see the next few weeks, months, or years? Is it something that US wants to foster? I hope no.
And
also,
can I ask, because the White House wants to bring the Ukrainian president to the US for talks, they are pushing both sides to come to an agreement. So do you trust Steve Witkoff, especially with reports that he was helping to coach a top Russian official? And if not, what do you want to see happen next?
I believe that US can invite more people to be in the negotiation team. Witkoff has proved to be quite pro-Russian. Witkoff has proved to consult with Russians all the time, and it looks like he's trying to push Russian interest through White House. In my opinion, this is not acceptable, not only for Ukraine, but also for US. For us, the peace deal or any kind of negotiation are important in terms of actually fair and lasting peace. We've already seen some attempts to do negotiations between Russia and Ukraine previously, like Minsk agreement or like Normandy format. But actually, Russia has broken all those previous negotiations, because the previous negotiations were totally pro-Russian. The conditions were pro-Russian, and thus they only encouraged Russia to invest more money in defense and come back to Ukraine with more tanks, more Russian soldiers, and more atrocities against Ukrainian civil society.
Yes.
Just civilians. Therefore, it's very important that these negotiations are not pro-Russians. Conditions are not pro-Russians. Otherwise, it will be just another fault, not negotiations and not a peace deal.
Halyna Yanchenko, a member of Ukraine's parliament, I appreciate you sharing that perspective with us. We know attacks have continued in your country and will continue to report on every aspect of this effort. President Trump says only a few points of disagreement remain on a possible deal to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. But the Kremlin this morning is watering down expectations so the deal is even close. For more on these efforts, we're joined now by CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and host of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, in our D.C. bureau. Good morning, Margaret. Great to see you. So we just spoke with a Ukrainian member of parliament a short time ago. She says she does not trust Russia. She believes Witkoff is very pro-Russian in her words, and that Russia doesn't stick to agreements. So give us the bigger picture. Where do the negotiations stand right now with the Ukrainians and Russians?
Well, what we know is that at this point, there is no active diplomacy with everyone at the same table. We have not yet heard that Russia or Vladimir Putin have accepted that term sheet, which is basically what the U.S. and Ukraine were hammering out, like what Ukraine could accept in terms of concessions. So there's no, as Russia put it, official proposal on the table. I have confirmed as of this morning that indeed next week, Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, is planning to bring the latest proposal to Russia. That's the plan in place. So we'll see if there is any kind of concession made whatsoever by Russia. But as you've seen from attacks, even just overnight, Russia is still very much focused on pressing its advantage on the battlefield. And the Trump administration, as you heard President Trump allude to in that chat on Air Force One earlier, is assessing that Russia could really just keep going with this war and ultimately win, or at least ultimately seize the eastern part of the country. And so the U.S. is kind of operating from that assumption at this point.
And so, Margaret, from your point of view, what has either shifted or changed in the past week? We went from U.S. sources kind of saying that, hey, Zelensky could come to the U.S., maybe there's an agreement by Thanksgiving, to actually not so much.
Right. Well, look, this is head-snapping diplomacy. Yeah. I've really, truly never seen anything like this. You had Zelensky himself saying just yesterday, I'm ready to go talk to President Trump. I'm ready to travel. Plans were being made here in Washington and in Mar-a-Lago for any kind of interaction if they were set to go. And then President Trump posted on social media, not ready to meet with Zelensky yet. So that Thanksgiving deadline has disappeared. And we know that there is sort of just an invitation to keep moving these trains along on these parallel tracks. But I can't emphasize enough here how unusual it is to have the diplomats uninvolved with diplomacy. That's not who's negotiating. You have on the U.S. side the Army Secretary, Dan Driscoll, very close to Vice President Vance, talking to the Ukrainians about security guarantees. He's not a diplomat. You have Steve Witkoff, who just recently started in diplomacy after being a longtime Trump friend and work in real estate, and Jared Kushner, who doesn't even work for the United States government right now, are working on the Russian end of things. So this is really unusual. So if you're confused by the back and forth, imagine what the professionals are who've trained to be doing this, because they are just very much trying to understand what is happening inside the Trump inner circle with these efforts. A lot of this exploded in the press last week in a way that surprised professional diplomats. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio seems involved in a limited way. He flew in over the weekend to Geneva and then flew out. And typically it would be the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State who would be sort of marshaling all the forces to pull in the same direction. And right now, it seems like that's not yet happening. You are seeing European officials close ranks around President Zelensky to try to help him press back and get the United States to provide more guarantees security-wise. You heard President Zelensky say overnight he wants things like access to frozen Russian funds in European bank accounts, and he wants the return of those kidnapped Ukrainian children as well.
Yeah, underscoring just how difficult this is, even with professionals, even when President Trump is using those he trusts to get a deal done. It's easier said than done. Margaret Brennan, always great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We turn now to efforts to stop the war in Ukraine. We're joined by CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. You see her there joining us from West Palm Beach, Florida. Nancy, good morning. In this hour, we've already heard from a Ukrainian member of Parliament, doubtful that a peace agreement can be reached. Now, Margaret Brennan shared some of the latest details. What are you hearing from the president on the state of negotiations? Because he seems somewhat optimistic.
He did, Errol, but it was fascinating because our ride down here on Air Force One was really our first opportunity to question the president in depth about the plan that is taking shape since that 28-point plan was revealed last week. And he told us that the plan has evolved. It was 28 points. It's now 22. And we got to ask him a series of questions about some of the criticisms that he received not only from Democratic and Republican lawmakers, but also from European leaders, that the plan was much too heavily slanted towards Russia's priorities. And some even felt that the plan was originally authored by the Russians. So we asked him what's changed in the plan to make the Ukrainians feel more positive, and what, if anything, the Russians will have to give up at the end of the day. Take a listen.
What kinds of concessions are the Russians going to have to make?
Well, they're making concessions. Their big concession is they stop fighting and they don't take any more land.
Now, that is not something that is going to thrill European leaders. They don't view those as concessions at all. Ending the fighting would be a baseline for any peace agreement, and they want Russia to give up territory, not simply stop the fighting at the current battle lines and take everything that they have managed to control so far. But overseas, the Ukrainians say that they are happy with the way that the plan has changed. You heard Vladimir Zelensky say that he's feeling good about the plan, but there are still sensitive details to be discussed. Whereas the Russians do not appear to be that happy that the plan is changing. They railed against that yesterday. They said they don't like the fact that the Europeans are getting involved. They don't think that that should have to happen at all. And interestingly, even though we know that Dan Driscoll, the Army Secretary, sat down with Russian officials, those Russians now say they haven't had serious talks about this plan at all.
All right, our Nancy Cordes getting questions directly to President Trump. Nancy, thank you.